and that you are all sitting tight and ready, because we have a very interesting discussion for you today. We are talking about the relevance of the church. And with me today, we have a panel of distinguished gentlemen. But before we introduce them to you, we want to have a word of prayer, shall we? Eternal Father and our God, we pray that you will be with us as we go on this Let's Talk journey today. We pray for your wisdom, your guidance. We ask that you will be with our panelists. We pray that you will be with those who are listening in Radio Land on Second Advent Radio and who are watching via our YouTube channel. We invite your presence and ask that you will take full control in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, this afternoon on Let's Talk, we are talking about the relevance of the church. Is the Seventh-day Adventist Church still relevant? Have we lost our relevance? With us today, we have a panel of distinguished gentlemen. As of the last time, you would recall that we had part one of this program sometime back in January. Well, now we have with us, of course, the president of the Caribbean Union of Seventh-day Adventists, Pastor Kern Tobias. For a moment, I lost him. Dr. Tobias, good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Well, it's great to be back. I'm always on, whether in presence or otherwise, but it's great to be back. Very, very great program.
Yes, I realize that you are one of our most regular listeners. We are delighted to have you with us. We also have joining us this afternoon an individual who is no stranger to the South Leeward Conference. We have Pastor Desmond James. Of course, Pastor Desmond James is a Caditian by birth. He pastored the South Leeward Mission and is now the president of the North Caribbean Conference. We are delighted to have you with us, Pastor James. Great to see you.
Delighted to be here, Dr. Greene. It's good to be back in South Leeward Mission.
All right, South Leeward Conference. I see your question too.
Sorry, South Leeward Conference. My profound apologies.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. Then from the East Caribbean Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, we have Pastor Danforth Francis. Pastor Francis, maybe I should have said Pastor Robinson F. Francis. Good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. It's a pleasure to be with you again. I feel part of your constituents, so I'm happy to be with you.
That's right. I always remember that your wife is from Antigua, so you're a part of us. That's right.
That's right.
Then we go over to the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Let's touch down on Tobago first. I understand the Trinidad airport is still closed, but Tobago is open, so we have to land in Tobago before we get to Trinidad. We have Pastor Tony Mapp. Pastor Mapp, delighted to have you as always. Please unmute.
Really happy to be here with you. I just came straight from a baptism. I just stopped off at one of our churches. Jumped into the basement so that I can be present and on time.
That's all right. That's all right. Delighted to have you. It's always a blessing when we know that the saints have been added to the kingdom of God. Wonderful.
Amen. Yes. Amen.
And finally, for today, we have Pastor Leslie Moses, president of the South Caribbean Conference. Pastor Moses, it is a delight to have you with us. We welcome you to Let's Talk. Greet the saints.
I'm delighted to be here. I told the church I visited today I'm going to Antigua.
Yes.
They certainly have a good flight, Pastor.
All right. Well, you know, the blessings of Zoom, the blessings of the internet, it is always so wonderful to know that we are separated by land, by sea, by circumstances, but we can still connect via the marvels of the internet.
Amen.
Gentlemen, this afternoon, we have a very important discussion. We are talking about the relevance of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The church over recent times has been buffeted by a few storms. Of course, it is God's church, and we know that the church will prevail. Jesus did tell us that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. So we have that assurance. We are grateful that today, as we discuss, we have In addition to our regular viewers on YouTube channel, we have also listening from around the South Leeward Conference via Second Advent Radio 101.5 FM. And of course, Second Advent Radio is aired also on the internet. So people are listening from all around the world. Delighted that we can join with people in Europe, people in North America, people in South America, people here in the Caribbean. We are going to be talking about the relevance of the church, as I said. Now, on our first program in part one, we looked at general impressions of persons in various communities. What do they think about the church? We looked at the expectations versus what the church offers and how the church adopts the cultural and societal norms. Today, we want to discuss the matter of responding to needs, fulfilling the mission, and maintaining standards, among other things. I want to begin by stating that the primary purpose of the church is to preach the gospel and to call lost people to salvation in Jesus. We know that, but are we satisfied with the methods employed by the church in fulfilling this focus? We're currently in an evangelistic campaign. We're on the Good News Virtual Impact, but are we satisfied generally beyond this campaign with the methods employed by the church in fulfilling this focus?
Well, if I were to begin, I would say to be satisfied would be risky, would be really risky, because one cannot be satisfied if one is not perfect. And so we are not satisfied, even though the virtual space has created for us a grand opportunity, but we could not be satisfied. That passionate person-to-person, house-to-house image of the church that we knew, years ago when more members were involved, we have become a little more sophisticated, and so that element is being missed somehow, And when I look at Acts chapter 5 and verse 42, it says, "And daily in the temple and in every house they cease not to teach and to preach Jesus Christ." So obviously there's much more that could be done, even though a lot is being done, and we give God thanks for what is being done, but we could not. I couldn't say that we are satisfied, really.
I think Dr. Greene, the methodology in every generation, in every era, the message is the same, but our methodologies depend a lot on the era and the times for which we have come. Watch at COVID. COVID gave us a big paradigm shift. And so the methods that we employ 2-3 years ago could easily become not most effective for now. So I believe all of the message remains the same. The methodology, how we deliver the message, will constantly change depending on the times and the era in which we find ourselves.
If I could add to that and add those two things, what Pastor Tobias said and what Pastor James said, possibly we could say our dissatisfaction is more the participation of our members, while methods will keep evolving as COVID-19 has demonstrated. This is the first time, I think, in our history in the Caribbean that we're having a union-wide campaign. Now, the methods that we used before would not have permitted us to have it. But through the advent of technology, the pandemic, we were able to develop a new methodology. So methods are always being created. What is, I think I'm hearing from the two of them, is that the participation by our membership, which Pastor Dr. Tobias suggested that it was a little more fervent some years ago, and we can go through all the methods that we've used, Bible studies, we've one-to-one Bible studies, seminars, campaigns, both lay and pastoral, literature evangelism, or schools, or community service, or health, or radio and television. All of these are methods that we still use. And some, as time goes on, they will become less effective, and so new methods will be created all the time. But we need persons. The harvest is ripe, but the laborers are few.
Can I suggest, Dr. Greene, that there's a paradox where in many cases, we have members of the church complaining to leadership, and specifically in Trinidad. We need more. We need to do more. We need more varied, we need varied methods of doing this one thing that we do. And they prime that in the light of the fact that, for the most part, many of our churches and the conference would generally use one method, crusade, the 10 crusade. And some years ago, about 4 years ago, Multisalim did some research for us in Trinidad and found that while members were complaining that this is the only thing we seem to be doing, 10 crusades, the members are not doing very much more. So the people who are complaining, we want new methods, different methods, and are the ones who are not doing the other things that can be done. I remember early in my days as a young Adventist, the issue of branch Sabbath school and the issue of, branch Sunday school they both were methods that were vigorously used many years ago. If you ask a church right now, have you used that recently? Or ask members, have you tried other methods other than, let's say, the crusade or maybe the house-to-house visitation, which seemed to be the next major method of the membership? They would tell you hardly likely. And so I think it's a paradox, and it is not that the members don't know what to do. I think we have become so busy, and we, the leadership, we have, created a type of niche for the members so that we do all of the hard work, the big 10 crusades, and we baptize the hundreds, and we allow them to relax and take it easy. And so the various methods, as far as I'm concerned, are not as prevalent. I'm happy for the new methods that Dr. Francis mentioned. And of course, we must explore additional methods, yes, because as time rolls on, we'd have to find new ways of doing the same old thing.
Pastor Moses, I am wondering, and I'm grateful that you went down that slant, but I'm wondering significantly the extent to which we have created that dilemma for ourselves, where we have excelled so much in the 10th campaign, where the evangelist stars, so to speak, the evangelist and a crusade team. We have Bible workers, we have some pastors working with those Bible workers, and the members come in the nights and they clap and they shout and they say amen, and think that is all that their responsibility is. And so to some extent, there is a dependency syndrome. The church is built, but there is this paid evangelist. And so even with COVID, and we are rejoicing over the virtual impact that we're having right now, we still really do have one primary evangelist proclaiming. To what extent, and I think this was behind my original question, to what extent should we seek seriously to create a new paradigm where individual members sense that they have a need, with evangelists and no evangelists, to share that message of salvation that they now have, that they are a part of something bigger than just having an evangelist coming in to preach. And I think that was really what was behind my original question.
But Dr. Greene, if I could go there with you, I do agree with what you are saying, but at the same time, it seems to me, historically, that the evangelists did better where there was that membership one-to-one contact, Bible studies, cottage meetings, literature, the schools, the radio, the influence of all of these different methods, branch Sabbath school, as Dr. Moses said, and branch schools, Pathfinder and Adventuring. All of these are activities which in themselves create the environment. If there's one thing that we are learning out of this, at least from my field, that we're learning out of this virtual campaign, is the need for that individual touch. This morning I was talking to somebody in Kenya who came on the platform, listened to the message, and they have challenges, but they needed somebody to talk to. somebody who could help, somebody who could guide. And this is where the members need to understand, although we have new methods which will do wonderful things, but that, if you want to say, the foot soldier is needed still in the church. And that's what I think that's what we are trying to say to your question, that yes, we need to get the foot soldiers back engaged and involved. And I think the church has done wonderfully well. Both all the departments and the personal ministries department is trying to train them and expose them to skills that according to their giftedness, so that they could help in this. Perhaps, as you said, we have affirmed and recognized the stars, as you put it, the one-man star or the one-woman star. We have affirmed them, maybe to the extent that people figure that if I do bring my 2 people or 3 people to a meeting every night because of my Bible work, well, the evangelist gets all the praise. I am sad about that we have not been able to maybe find a good method to affirm those people who are the foot soldiers. But the foot soldiers need to recognize that they are doing a wonderful task. It is a needed task. And if we can get back there, we would even finish the gospel faster.
And Dr. Greene, I agree with you, but could it be, and I believe that a lot of times circumstances and eras greatly influence our behavior and performance. Yes, we have depended heavily, especially in the Caribbean, on mass evangelism. But we as leaders maybe should take the opportune moment now to redirect our strategic mapping and agenda, and realize now that COVID exposed us to the reality that Jesus says we are fishers of men. He didn't tell us which method to use, although he did point out you have the mass evangelism, which is the 10th crusade, but you also have the fishing line. And I think this is a good era for us to reevaluate that there is a diversity of methodologies out there. Somebody sent me a WhatsApp that was both humorous and full of potential. It says that the devil said to Jesus, look, I've closed down every town in the city, every church in the city because of COVID. And Jesus flashed back, no, I've opened one in every home. And so circumstances create opportunity for us to reevaluate and re-strategize. It's saying now, if we can push our members to realize that each one of us, every member is a fisher of men. And if we can utilize it, it lends to our creativity. It's a good moment to depend on, dig deep into our creativity and realize that there are a whole lot more methods that we can utilize for the promulgation of the gospel.
Man.
Okay, wonderful. Let me direct my next question to Pastor Mapp, given that we have not yet heard from him. A very interesting discussion so far. We have some questions coming in from our viewers, but we'll get to that in a bit. And by the way, before I go to Pastor Mapp, I would like to let our viewers know that we are taking a few extra minutes this afternoon, so we'll be wrapping up around about 4:30. I'm sure many of you are going to be happy for that. Every week we get a complaint from our viewers that the time is too short. But Pastor Mapp, let me begin. Let me get to you now with this. One aspect, given that we're talking about evangelism, one of the charges that some people make about the Seventh Adventist Church is that we tend to become hostile to other denominations. My question to you is, how do we build bridges while at the same time call people out from these various other denominations?
Excellent question. I think it begins with just loving. You know, I think that even when we talk about relevance, love is the missing ingredient in many instances. Are we really loving? When we preach, even before we get to the pulpit, when we live among the people, are we really loving to them? That Pentecostals, Baptists, everyone in your community can say, look, this is my pastor. I mean, what you say about the reverend, this is my pastor. I mean, I experience that so very often that that is not fun. How I experience that so very often, that people come up to me and claim me as their pastor in spite of their official denomination from which they are part. And that sense of that a kinship that I feel with them and they feel with me, to even respect them when I open my mouth in the pulpit to preach evangelistically, so that there's a way to word your sentences. There are ways to speak, because part of our struggle is that we need to be separate and to stand in the context of the remnant. But at the same time, there's a place we will end up being isolated and alone, and unless we begin to see that being separate in that sense doesn't necessarily mean standing off from, being separate and holding high to your ideals does not mean that at the same time you cannot laugh with people and greet them and embrace them as your own, in spite that they're not part of your denomination. And I think that is where the church needs to find itself. And that is, if the church is able to do that, the walls are going to come down. When they invite us to some of their programs, can we attend to some of these programs? The walls are going to come down if we do that. And that is where I see us going in terms of the theme you have of relevance and the question of our evangelistic methods, creating more friends as opposed to creating more enemies.
I quite agree to Pastor Mapp in that regard, and there's this famous saying that we quote from the Spirit of Prophecy, that Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good, mingled so as to desire their good. In my own journey as a spiritual leader, I remember being in training and hearing some of my senior pastors preaching at funeral services, where visitors come in to support the families of the grieving. And sometimes I had been exposed to this approach where we try to get doctrines across that are different. So at least we didn't get you in a church. Now that we get you, we'll say something. And I remember as a young pastor, sometimes people come out of the service, they're angry, and especially in little communities. And I had to unlearn that. I had to understand what this thing about mingling meant, as Pastor Mapp just explained, where people just want to be loved. And yes, there will be a time for sharing the unique doctrines, but we need to be sensitive to the hurts that people go through, the needs that they have, the felt needs they have, and understand how Christ was able to mingle without getting mixed up, and seek the good of people. This is a critical need of the church, and we have to understand what love can do in breaking down those barriers indeed.
And gentlemen, when you look at the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, how we started, you realize that while we have to do it differently, Dr. Tobias and Pastor Mapp, we cannot help it. The way William Miller called people from every denomination to this awakening of the Second Advent, and the way folk came together to form the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I'm saying we really can't help it. Our theology is based on, our theology of evangelism, I should say, is based on the fact that other people will come from other places. They call us sheep stealers in some quarters, because of how we understand Jesus's injunction, other sheep I have. And of course, Revelation 18, come out of her, my people. So that it's almost as if, we caught between a rock and a hard place to respect them, to love them, to allow them to have their rights to stay, but also to challenge them to do what we understand must be done in order for the message to go out to all the world. I think Dr. Tobias, I know that Dr. Tobias is absolutely correct, Pastor Mapp as well. If we're going to do it, since it's a part of our theology, since it's a part of our history and our DNA, it has to be done with respect. It has to be done with love. It has to be done so that people, Dr. Tobias, do not feel angry because of what we say to them. We have to find better ways to say it, but we have to. We just have to say it because we are.
But isn't there this sense that You know, when I have unfortunately heard some pronouncements that are really uncalled for. And every now and then, maybe an evangelist gets too heated and he says of another church, "Oh, you're in Babylon," and you know, that kind of stuff. And the members seem to be rather very excited about that. And they say, "Preacher, preacher."
Beat them, beat them.
On the other hand,
Give it to them.
on the other hand, every now and then we have an occasion where we are called to maybe a national day of prayer where we unite with people of other denominations. And invariably you hear members saying, "This is inappropriate. Why are you doing that?" So where is this coming from?
Yeah, if I could join the discussion here, I think what my three colleagues said is very pertinent to the matter. And Dr. Tobias quoted a statement from Ellen G. White. I want to quote another one, which seems to buttress the whole idea that just because you're right, that doesn't mean you have to be arrogant and bombastic with it. She said, if we would humble ourselves before God and be kind and courteous and tender-hearted and pitiful, there would be 100 conversions to the truth where there is only one now. So that is not saying that we must give up the truth. Yes, we have a historical beginning which said that, yes, other people were teaching some Bible truth, but we wanted to carry it a little further to the greater discovery of Bible truth. And so that caused us to challenge people about keeping the Sabbath and about the state of the dead. In a experience I had, I attended a funeral in Suriname, I think it was, and the person who preached the sermon was, and remember, non-Adventists were here. You think I come here to hear Adventist doctrine about the state of the dead? We came for comfort. They were so disturbed because what the preacher did was inappropriate at that time. So if we would humble ourselves and be consider what I like to say the golden rule. How would you like somebody to approach you if you were in their position? If we were kind and considerate and understanding, okay, these people have grown up three decades, 2 decades, 4 decades with one thought. Now in 1 week you have told them that a substantial content of what they believe was wrong. It is not easy for people just to take it like that. So we need to be kind and considerate. But unfortunately, we have a human weakness. The more we are convinced that something is true, the more intolerant we are. But this is a plea for tolerance and for love.
Dr. Greene, I believe that one of the methods is simply that we must build bridges. Amazingly, there is a lot more that unites us than what separates us. A lot of us must understand that. And if you take a page from Paul's playbook, Paul went to Athens. You remember when he went to Athens? That was the most profane, permissive, idolatrous society. And he went in, he mingled with the people. We got to build bridges. We got to go in there. He went into their marketplace. He read their books. He read their poets. He studied the philosophies of Plato and Socrates. He mingled with them. And so we must begin where they are. In other words, there's a lot of commonality that we have with them. And I can revert back to, I did evangelism with K.S. Wiggins. And K.S. Wiggins taught us that methodology. He called it melting, molding, and making hard. In other words, yes, the truth is truth, and it cuts against the grain because it's against our sinful nature. But if you go in there and you begin where we are, you melt them. What do we have in common? And have them in agreement, and then lead them gradually. You melt them, talk about the doctrines and the love. Everybody love Jesus. Everybody love God. We know that Jesus Christ is coming. Begin there, and you mold them. So if we just go in and slap them with the radical gospel, people become resistant. So it's a journey, and I think we ought to build bridges first. Go in, find the common purposes that we share, rather than just going and lash them with the Sabbath or something of that nature. So it's not what we do, it's how we do it that effectively brings about results.
Now, this is a very interesting discussion, but we're going to have to move on. There are a few questions that our viewers are asking already. So I want to bring in, just look at one or two of the questions that are coming in from our viewers. I like to give attention to what the viewers are asking. And I'm going to ask two questions here at the same time because they may be related. One, this viewer is saying, is it that we have developed a new methodology? Earlier we were talking about methodologies. Is it that we have developed a new methodology, or we have made use of the technologies that are available? And then how do we build and maintain relationships in this social distancing era? That's one question from our viewers that has come in. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that.
Well, I want to respond to the second one first because there are those who are more inclined towards the methodologies as we discussed. So let me go with the how to maintain. Well, WhatsApp, Facebook, what have you. These are the current aspects of communicating and relating and staying in contact. And even with this good news impact. I have had relationships with people. I don't see them now, but I have their phone numbers and sent the link to some of these people, just maintaining some contact. And it's amazing. It's amazing what the history of our relationships have done. So that they took very seriously the link and got on board. I had the privilege of visiting one such family this past week. And I was amazed. They were so excited about this thing. They say, we are sending this thing out to all our friends and our family. So the one contact that I sent them to, they were now sending to all their family members because they found this is so amazing. This is exactly what we need in this end time. We get this sense that things are happening. So that the social network is powerful. It calls for commitment and consistency in the way we relate to people and making sure that we use it wisely to allow for the Spirit of God to do what we may not be able to do by our own presence. But it's very, very effective and very powerful.
Well, if we were to look at the methodology, Dr. Greene, what happens is, look here, the needs of human beings are always the same in every generation. Men are lonely, men are hopeless, men are sad, discouraged, and so on, in every generation. So the human needs do not change. But how the vehicle we adopt or employ or deploy to meet those needs vary, and they're going to vary. For example, one of the challenge of this present crusade is that a lot of listeners are there. How do we access them? In other words, you can't go to visit them in their homes. So a method of visitation now has to be adopted that is unique to our situation. A lot of people are listening. But the gap between those who are listening and where we get them to make a decision for Jesus Christ is a widening gap. There's a vacuum there because how do we contact them? How do we get in touch with them? How do we get that face-to-face relationship? So relationships has always been there. The methods in which we reach out now to develop these relationships are going to change. They must be just come up with new methodologies. How do we use technology? How do we use the media now to come face to face and confront these people having heard the word of God? So yes, we have to sit down and say, what method, what can we employ now to reach those people? Otherwise, they're going to hear the gospel and there won't be any contact, or some will walk right into the crusade, but others will need that prompter. If you're in a tent and you see somebody struggling, you go now and you pull them over the line. In the virtual crusade, somebody may be struggling right there in their home, they may be timid, and there's nobody to reach out as in the personal touch. So we got to develop methodologies and strategies. How do we utilize to get over that hump?
All right, here is another question from one of our listeners, and this question is an interesting question. Have we identified the inroads the enemy is making in the church? And where are we this in 2 weeks time we will be having a very special, well, 2 weeks, yes, very special feature on Let's Talk, because I'm going to be engaging, I believe, Dr. Hassel from the Biblical Research Institute, and we're going to be talking about those ideas of, fanatical inroads. Some people charge the church with Catholic influences, and there is the King James Version discussion. So in 2 weeks time, we're going to be having a 2-part series on Let's Talk, and it's going to be very interesting. But in the meantime, one of you can respond to this question. Shall I ask the question again?
Yes.
The question is, have we identified the inroads the enemy is making in the church, and where are we compromising?
Catholicism really means a generalized, everything goes kind of philosophy. And it's different from the peculiarities that, the church is known for. We are royal priesthood, holy generation, peculiar people, and we should go forth and show forth the praises of God. That's one of the things we have to be very careful about, of allowing our uniqueness and our peculiarities, despite the need for love, as we discussed a while ago, and maintaining relationships and building bridges, and we have to be very careful that we do not go to the other extreme, where our identity is lost. And that's one of the challenges that the social network allows. It allows for so many different streams of information from all different sources, that if we are not careful, we could lose our identity and the uniqueness that the church should stand for. And that's one of the things we have to be very careful about, in addition to many others. But that's what I want to start with.
Well, the inroads could be endless. I know one of the challenges we have in this cyber space era is that everybody has a voice and everybody has their own pulpit. There are no borders. So if I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, quote unquote, and I have a theory, I have a certain philosophy, I have a voice, I have a mic, I can get on the cyberspace and send it out. There's no inhibition, there's no prohibition, nobody can stop me. And I think that's one of the challenges. How do we overcome that? It's quite a challenge for us.
And we live in an age where the postmodern age, everybody's truth is truth. And that's a challenge to a church that has a certain system of beliefs. So while it is true that there's room for a growth in that system of belief and deeper understanding of the scriptures, certainly is not to, as Ellen G. White would say, not to destroy the foundations that we have. If she says, if we look at Zion, there's nothing wrong with Zion. It's more with me and with each of us. But what we have accepted as truth for this last days is still truth, even if I don't accept it. And this is what people have to understand, that some people seem to want to change the church rather than to be changed by the church. Somebody put it in America, the Americans like a religion that comforts them, not corrects them.
Well, maybe it's a good time. I was intending to ask this question a little later down, but given what we are discussing, let me go ahead and ask it now. There is an increasing tendency over recent times for persons to be forming groups which sometimes are not necessarily in line with the doctrinal beliefs of the church. They emphasize study. I've had people say to me, oh, you don't study enough. Is this in any way reflective of a failure on the part of the church to respond to the nurturing of its members?
I think
To me, it is.
people form groups to fulfill various needs. I can speak of the groups that were formed in Trinidad recently. I'm not going to call any names, even though this is very public, but Dr. Tobias knows what I'm talking about. I pastored in the San Juan area when he pastored in the Belmont, Laventil area, when a certain very famous preacher, came on the scene. He pulled members from those churches to form his own church. And it wasn't an issue of study or the lack of study. I think it was, in that particular case, being disgruntled about, the conference and leadership, being disgruntled about not getting his way in certain areas, and also clamoring for more freedom to eat what you want, freedom to drink what you want, freedom to wear what you want. And so those folks just came out wearing their jewelry. Yeah, they kept Sabbath, but they did a revolutionary thing as far as they were concerned to form this new group. It was not because of an issue of study. They had other issues. Ironically, Dr. Greene, they fizzled out. Many of them never returned. They've still not returned. And that's the danger for me. When these guys and gals decide to form their groups for whatever reason, the damage they do to those who leave is irreparable very often. And only heaven will tell the consequences of that type of thing. If you were to ask me, are we studying sufficiently? I would tell you no. If you were to ask me, are we as strong in the proclamation of the imminent return of Jesus as the pioneers were, I would tell you no. And of course, these are some of the things that some of these guys who pull away talk about. You all are not talking about the imminence of the coming of Jesus, and you're not studying sufficiently. I think there are various reasons why they would leave, some of them very selfish.
All right, Pastor Mapp, sounds as though you were attempting to come in here, so let's hear from you.
Yeah, I am of the view that a number gone along similar lines as what Pastor Moses just shared. A number of times persons they have their own agendas why they would move away from the church. It always amazes me how sometimes those persons are with the church for all these years. You don't hear from them, don't study, then they pick up with some group and then there are 15 books, with them to explain some things to you that we're not doing and we're not doing. And I'm saying, so if we're not doing it, can you stay with the church and help us to do it? Why do you have to form your own groups in order to make sure it is done? I think if people understand, they have a passion for the church. They love this church. They're not disgruntled about stuff. They learn how to trust membership and leadership. There's a big trust issue that is causing some of these things. Sometimes they're hearing stuff about the church that they don't know if it is really so. And therefore they're pursuing these hearsay things. And this has become even more a challenge for us because we live in this era in which everything is out there. Truth and non-truth is out there online and wherever. And people are hearing it and say, you hear about the Adventist church, the Adventist church now have their own pope, and you hear that there's, And so people are hearing stuff and they're gravitating to the stuff that they're hearing, and they don't trust their local leadership. They don't trust the church. And so they'll pursue things that is the hearsay, that is not the truth about the church. I even see pastoral leadership becoming engaged in some of these things, and they sit on boards and in different meetings, and when the members speak certain things, rather than correct membership and say, hey, no, this is what is happening, this is how that must be understood. And if the pastor doesn't get it, the pastor can come to the leadership of the church and ask the question, am I to be understanding that the reason we have done this is because so and so, because that is what is being said, and get the clarity. And if the pastor himself trusts the leadership and carries that, the trust is going to be across the board. And the whole question of membership, following and feeling comfortable with their church and staying with the church, all of that is going to fall into line if we get this behind us, that this is a trust relationship. This is a church that is on a pathway that no one man runs this church. The decisions in this church made by groups such as boards and executive committees, and therefore no one person could overthrow the beliefs of this church. If we understand things like that and function in that context, I think we're going to be at the place we need to be, with more joy and more of our members not getting tied up in a number of the things we get tied up in.
Dr. Greene, could I come in there? I have agree with all that my colleagues have said, but I think we need to establish that the church has provided opportunities for every member to study, and they don't have to run anywhere to study. We have the Sabbath school lesson, and historically we have not done very well. And some of these people who form these groups would never study a Sabbath school quarterly because they are trying to develop a theory of position which is hostile to the position of the church. But we have preaching every Sabbath. We have AY and good programs in the AY. We have Sunday evening prophecy and so on. We most of the pastors in their pastoral district will try to cover all the doctrines of the church in the year. And then you have our literature. We have Bible readings for the home circle. All of these and the Sabbath school lesson, as I said, for all ages. But many people are not studying these. And then they're trying to say, well, the church is not studying. When it's really the church has provided the opportunity for members to study and to study deeply. And with our literature, there is always the opportunity going further in studying. If you think that what the pastor might have said in his sermon, you want to find something more. There always good literature that our members could use. And so, while yes, we would like to see everybody study more, but there's not an excuse that the church is not providing the vehicles and the opportunity for study.
Well, I'm going to let Dr. Tobias come in here, but let me just add, because, going back to what Pastor Mapp said earlier, Pastor Mapp, you're so true. There is this trust element, but there seemed to be almost a deliberate attempt to undermine trust in the leadership of the church. And the other thing that concerns me personally is that there is this, should I say, itching ears? The internet is flooded with all kinds of things.
I just stopped short of saying that.
People have this tendency to take or to regard whatever is on the internet as gospel. They never stop to say, where's the origin of this? What is the intent behind the person who is putting it out, etc. But once they see it, they run with it. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's just pure garbage. Dr. Tobias, you were coming in here.
Oh, yes. Well, there are two points I wanted to make. One is the importance of the shepherd motif in the whole idea of building trust. The shepherd and the sheep, and Christ referenced this significantly in his teachings, and of course, the Ezekiel mentioned the whole shepherd motif. And so trust is built naturally between a shepherd and a sheep, so that we have to question the effectiveness and efficacy of shepherds. Shepherds who go out there for the sheep when the sheep is wounded, when the sheep is sick, when the sheep is threatened. And so I want us to consider that is a critical component in the whole trust issue. And then, of course, the itching ears, I just was referencing what Paul said to Timothy. He says, preach the word. He said, I charge thee before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom. Preach the word. Be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts they shall heap up to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. Now that's a prophecy that Paul gave to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. And he's saying itching ears would be one of the curses of this contemporary age. And so I want to balance this reality of the itching ears syndrome and the need for the shepherds to be in the presence of the sheep to the extent where when there is a genuine sheep who is confronted with these fables, they can run to the shepherd and get the true explanation, and the shepherd can even detect when the sheep is going off course. So I want us just to balance those two realities.
Now I want to jump in here with something else, because in as much as we are taking an extra half hour, it's almost 4 o'clock. So let me jump in here with something else. And then there are several questions that viewers are asking, and we do want to go to them. But I do want to to go to this particular aspect. Some make the charge that the church is too silent in matters of injustice and other social issues. Do we agree with this? To what extent should the church get involved in let's say, community activism? Let's see your take on this one. Shall I call a name?
Right, like they're waiting for the union president to speak, so let me.
Okay.
You know, the model for me and social activism is Jesus Christ. You know, I study the approach of Christ. Sometimes Christ said, "Who made me a judge in these matters? My kingdom is not of this world." And so issues that involve what we have just been studying in our lesson study, you know, where in Isaiah it says, where Christ says, my mission really is to relieve the suffering, give sight to the blind, help those who are downtrodden. And so anytime the church is faced with a reality that in society, there is the reality of the voiceless, that the church has to be willing to take on the role of being the voice for the voiceless, the ears for those who are not able to even understand. The church has to provide that advocacy for in those circumstances. But everything that comes up, you know, Trump this or Biden that or Putin that, the church doesn't have to jump up and speak to every issue. But the issues that allow for clarity and for advocacy and a better understanding of the reality of the gospel and how it can transform lives. There are some situations, yes, that we can be more vocal on, but we don't have to be a voice in every situation.
It seems, Dr. Greene, one of the challenges with jumping in every fight, would ruin the purpose for which we're here. These polarized people, I'm not saying that we should be silent when there is injustice. Right recently in Trinidad, there was an upsurge, Trinidad and Tobago upsurge in the honor of the community because of murders that were perpetrated against women. And should the church stay silent? The answer is absolutely no. But to pick up a placard and to stand in front of the government house or in front of the Red House and to shout at the police and behave as some of these folk are behaving, I mean, it's not the way. We need to speak. We need to say that this is injustice and this is cruel. But we need to also preserve the fact that we have a mandate, we have a greater agenda. We are part of this great controversy motif, if you will, and we need to protect that at all costs because it hurts us more than it can help.
All right.
Okay.
The church
who was it? Pastor James, go ahead.
Go ahead, Pastor James.
I believe that the church should be more vocal on social issues, some social issues, definitely. And if we just study Isaiah, and God equates injustice on the same level in which he expects us to go out and reach out to the hungry and the poor.
Yes.
But it's how we do it. But there's a lot of injustice, and as we come to the end of time, that's going to be one of the signs of the last days. Racial injustice, racial discrimination, and so on. I don't think we should be mute. We must be vocal, let our voice be heard, and say, this is not Christ-like. So I'm definitely believe that I think we shy away sometimes. Probably we are afraid to get into to trouble the waters sometimes. But I think as we come to the end of days, I know in my region, hey, there's a lot of injustice, and we need to speak out, because if you remain silent, it seems as though you don't care, you're not concerned, and these are the same people we have to reach out to the gospel, with the gospel. Mm-hmm. So we have to defend them, be a voice for the voiceless. So I believe that we could do a lot more. The Adventist Church is a little mute on social issues that are affecting our society.
Now, reaching out is one thing, and I think I agree with you, Pastor James. The church needs to be more active there, making a difference. What I find, though, with a lot of activism is that it sadly takes some kind of political slant.
Right.
And so there is not enough objectivity for people to stand up for issues across political landscapes. People tend to, because this party supports this, I'm going to speak to this. And when another party says something, they go against it. If the church is going to be involved, the church must not appear to be political. The church has to be very objective in its proclamations. And that's my view personally.
Dr. Greene, I wanted to come in here on this because I think that while I agree that as a church with Dr. James that we could be more vocal, I think the biggest challenge to us, like what you said, is also how do we also demonstrate justice among ourselves? When as a member there we are treating another brother unjustly, and then we want to shout from the housetop or the mountaintop that you must have justice, and there's not justice in our system. And so I think we have to, as a church, choose the position of strength like Jesus, that what he said was backed by how he lived. And so as a church, I think we need to challenge ourselves before we talk about getting into the fray. And as I tell my people here, and well, some of us have politicians on both sides of the fence. And when one politician says and that one thing, they want the church to respond. When the other side says something, we must keep quiet. And so I said, no, I don't think the way that we should relate to some of the social issues is just getting on a housetop or a political platform and shouting at people. We know diplomacy, where we can sit with somebody and when we preach our messages, how we relate in families, we would be doing lots more to the community, but than just getting up and shouting, this is injustice. That's my view, that we could live a little better, and then what we say, and when we do say it would have greater force than just getting up and saying, shouting for injustice.
All right, I want to go to some of the questions that several of our viewers have been asking. We are going to ask you, gentlemen, to be brief in your responses because we have a lot of questions and we want to get through as many as possible. So I'm going to, let's see, where are we? All right, let's go. So this person here seems to have a concern for our treatment of individuals who just come into church. The question is, are there new innovative strategies in place to address the old issues of having many souls baptized, but 5 months afterwards, many that were baptized fall away, are no longer involved or committed? Who wants to respond to that?
I can start. I think when you study the New Testament and when you study Jesus and his ministry, you will discover that inevitably many will fall away. The parable in Matthew 13 that talks about the sower, the parable that talks about the net and the fisherman, those tell us clearly that not all that come in would stay in. We have a responsibility to do our very best to ensure that all that comes in stays in by adopting as many methods as possible to keep them. And we're going to be short, so I would not mention very many of them, but one of the ones that has been tried and tested and proven is the whole matter of friendship. People stay around when they know there are people in that community that they can call friends, people that they can depend on. And for me, that's the most critical thing. It's more important than doctrinal affirmation. They need to know that there is a person here that I can rely on, that I can call on, that I can say is my friend, that I can talk to, that I can go to. And that, I think, is the number one issue. Some will go, brethren. Some will go. No matter what we do, they will go. Even in heaven, Dr. Greene, some left. And the great God of heaven couldn't keep them from leaving. So it will happen, but let's try to minimize how many of them.
Dr. Greene,
Dr.
I would
Greene.
just add 2 words. 2 words. We must
right.
accept. We must accept those who come, and we must put them to work.
All right. That is indeed 2 words. Pastor James, you were adding.
Yeah, I was saying we are heavy on theory and weak on practice. We are weak in containing our membership, and we have to realize that. I've just developed a philosophy, a strategy coming out of preaching Luke when he caught the catch. He said, catch them, count them, contain them, and celebrate with them. That I just developed a theory on that. Remember when he told him to cast out the net? He said, bring in your net, count them, know how much we bring in, contain them, make sure the net doesn't break, and celebrate with them. And we are heavy on theory. There are lots of books, but the reality in our churches, conservation is deplorable, weak, and we have to strengthen that part of our church.
Very well.
Strengthen that part of our church. I'm just saying to strengthen that part of our church. We have to get all of us to recognize that this thing about, when groups come together and how conflicts are inevitable, and teaching the membership and ourselves how to relate to this, to when challenges come, and don't destroy the relationship because of the challenge, and how to walk through it. That's one of the areas that we have to give serious attention to, so that our members expect it. The politicians go and drink after they have quarreled in parliament. Why can't we drink some juice together after we had a falling out? We have to come to that place and stop wanting this perfection that we're looking for. It is going to have conflict. There are going to be conflicts, but how do we treat one another after the falling out? That has to be something we set up in our churches, and out of that, people are going to come to the church and stay.
Well, gentlemen, I think we have the model both in the Bible and in the writings of Ellen G. White.
Yes.
The small group concept, where there are communities that can foster that love and that fellowship. It's, and unfortunately in these parts, in the Caribbean, we are weak in that. But I have personally, in my own ministry, tried that method with great success. And I know that it can work. Ellen White says she was shown by one who cannot err.
That's right.
That's the way to go. But we do need to move on again. So I want to ask another question. This time I'm going to ask Dr. Tobias to respond to this one. I don't know what the question is yet, but let me see what it is. It says, it is one thing for us to pat ourselves on the back and say that we are relevant, but would the world, the society around us, agree that we are relevant? How do we serve in our community? And the serve there is written in caps. So the emphasis here seems to be, how are we giving back to our community? How do we serve in our community?
Well, this is a very, very pertinent question. And the reality is that patting ourselves on the back, it's a healthy approach, but it can also be deceptive. Where we are taking credit for what is not reality. And so it's a balance. It's striking a balance between understanding what we are doing, because it's all about felt needs, where the needs are. We have the ADRA, we have community services, we have the education, we have our hospitals, we have the youth department, and so many other ministries we have. And it's a case of finding out what the needs of people are and being able to adequately supply those needs. But the church is doing quite a bit. I have to admit that our church does quite a bit. In our country, in Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, the state agencies, when there are emergencies, they know that the Seventh Adventist network is one of the most trusted and reliable in the country. It is just incredible. And when I was at the South Caribbean Conference, Pastor Moses, we were working together, and the ODPM, they saw us as significant liaison in getting needs out, meeting the needs of the people who are affected by natural disasters. And so, yes, there are systems in the church. We just have to make them work. As Pastor James said, the practice must come in and take over, from just the theories.
All right, another question. Is this, in this period of social distancing, do you think members are socially isolating rather than fulfilling the purpose to the Lord's work? Do you think they have slipped into a shell? Interesting question.
I don't think so. I see people interact. I was at the church today. I can call the name. It was a church in Central Chase Village. And as I got there, the brother who was at the door taking the temperature and so on, he went and rushed and cleaned up his hand and said, Pastor, I see you all the time, but I want to shake your hand. Of course, I had to resist him. And but we were able to synergize and to do other things that would suggest that we were connected. I think while we are starved for the hugs and the kisses and the handshakes, I think we have learned to adapt, and we have learned to adjust to fit the situation. Thank God it will not always be this way. I have to be very careful when I say this. I heard somebody recently talking about the issue of the new normal and was suggesting that it's not a new normal, it's a new abnormal, and that, we're not sure how far this will go. So I'm hoping that we would be able to get back to some of the things. Life will not be the same. I thank God that at least people know how to wash their hands. I've been to airports, Dr. Greene. I've been to my own office, Pastor Mapp. And so people walk into the bathroom and walk out as if they were walking up and down a corridor, And this pandemic has taught us how to be more hygienic. So some things will change, hopefully, but some things will be renewed. And the matter of the socializing and the social networking, I think, will continue. And people have found other ways to socialize, because we are adaptable. We are people, we are resilient. We know how to bounce back. We know how to get back into the fray. And I'm so not afraid of that fellowship and that socializing aspect that may be a concern in some quarters.
Dr. Greene, if I can add to that, I believe it could easily happen. For example, during this COVID, I asked all my pastors to develop a methodology to connect and communicate. No, it's a lot easier. When we count our membership now, right now in North Carolina, we have a hybrid. We have some in church and some at home. When you count your membership now, you got to say those at church in the physical temple and those at home in their house. Some of them, by virtue of their demographic, they can't come to church. The older ones are asked to stay home lest they catch COVID. So I believe there is a great opportunity now. So when you count in your membership, if you have 500 members, you got to say 5 come to church, and 495 are home in their house churches. So yes, it's easier to lose them if you're not diligent, but it's a whole lot of a new paradigm shift. Telephone, WhatsApp, you could open a WhatsApp group. All of you could be talking together. So even though you don't have the face-to-face reality, you can still connect virtually.
Amen.
I thought
address the matter as it relates to whether or not membership, if as a leader of the church or if as a member in the church, I am not going out. Because COVID has created a situation that allow me to hide. I kind of was sensing that in the question that was being asked. Does it allow me to hide and withdraw myself and not be mixed in with the group? And therefore, the whole question of being able to touch base with the membership and keep the membership engaged and so forth could be lost in a context like this, except there's an intentionality. And I just wanted to say that, except there's an intentionality on the part of the individuals to recognize they're part of a church. And I often say to my members, one of the things that we learn when we're cooking with coal pot and with coals is that if you put the coals together, you could get food. If you pull them apart, the fire is going to go out. And the reason for church is coal potting, Thank you very much.
But Dr. Greene,
if I could add there too.
Gentlemen,
if I could interject, there's the reverse of that to Dr. Greene. The fellow who was afraid and shy to go face to face, he can send you a WhatsApp message and connect with you. So it has the reverse side also.
Definitely, but gentlemen, we must move on. We must move on. I thought that adding half an hour would have given us all the time we need, but I'm realizing that I'm speaking to preachers. Well, here is another question. We want to get 2 or 3 more questions in. Here's another question. Is there a protocol for when a person, a pastor or an elder, is on the pulpit or in front of the congregation saying something that another in the congregation disagrees with?
Good question.
I'll go ahead and answer it, Pastor.
A great question.
I would have thought. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would have thought that just on simple decorum, since it is not a discussion, he's preaching. If it's a Sabbath school lesson to study, yes, but if he's preaching under that regime, that is not time for challenging. But I believe it would be in place if you thought that the elder or the pastor or whoever was speaking did say something which is inappropriate, that after the service he could be met and discussed with it. I've seen it happen in my own life where people challenge the pastor or the elder, and then I remember that happening with a certain pastor with a certain member who said, well, look, what you said is a direct contradiction of what you said. He quoted him chapter and verse. So, but that was not to embarrass the pastor, but it was to help the pastor or the speaker to understand that he's made a mistake. So I think just simple decorum would recommend that you would not challenge the person publicly like that, but you would wait till after. And then you would hope that the person would be man or woman enough to get up and say, look, I made an error. Let me apologize and correct myself and go forward.
Yeah, the
protocol in public is always to put up one's hand.
Yeah.
You know, put up your hand, and if you're recognized, you speak. If you're not, then you keep quiet.
All right. Now, it's interesting. I wasn't going to comment further on this one. I was just going to say that the Apostle Paul says all things must be done decently and in order.
Fair enough.
All right. Another question. This question says, how do we conserve membership after big baptisms when we have a track record of 85% newly baptized members leaving in 4 weeks?
Repeat the question, please. Thanks.
I don't know if that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let me repeat the question, and then you can respond. It says, how do we conserve membership after big baptisms when we have a track record of 85% newly baptized members leaving in 4 weeks? That's who was responding.
Can I start off quickly by saying one of the challenges I think is sometimes we are too anxious to baptize some people.
But let me interrupt you a minute, Pastor Moses. Do we really have a track record of 85% loss?
That's why I want to challenge up front. I don't know if that is true.
Now, it is high, but not that high, I think.
Yeah, I think the person is using numbers to make a point.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm saying one of the things we have to guard against is probably not being so anxious to baptize some people. Of course, the New Testament doesn't give us the right to prohibit baptism, but sometimes there are glaring signs that this person may not make it. So we allow them to come to church, maybe. I'm saying maybe because you never can tell. And I'm very cautious even about that statement because, you don't want to withhold baptism from somebody and they pass away or something like that. That would be forever a guilt. But we should also put a support system. Dr. Greene, you said it. The home cells, I mentioned earlier, the friendship aspect. I think Pastor Francis mentioned the aspect of teaching them to evangelize and getting to work. The social aspect, I think, is also very important. There is much more to do. one of the mistakes we make as I end is that in many places, in many quarters, we only begin to organize that conservation strategy after the effort, after the 500 has been baptized. Right. And it should be done way before. The mechanisms should be put in place. The budget should be already voted to help with those who need rent and those who would have lost their jobs and those whose husbands have ostracized them and wives the same. And so it's a multi-pronged approach, Dr. Greene. And in many areas, we have failed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
President Moses.
Just a minute, gentlemen. We have 5 minutes remaining. And because we're talking about relevance and because a significant number in a percentage in our church is young, I want to put this one in. We are not going to be able to respond to all the questions, but another activity of the church is worship. Worship styles differ from place to place. Now, young people often complain that there is a lack of attraction for them in the general worship service, except they say in tent crusade situations. How do we balance this? And why is there a significant difference between the tent, quote unquote, and the sanctuary?
First, I would like to say, Dr. Greene, that it is a generational issue. The older generation will prefer a different type of worship service than the younger generation. And I think we must acknowledge, once we are a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational church, that you're going to have these struggles, and that the leadership of the church must come to grips with seeing how they can best manage the two groups or the three groups or the four groups. And it's not just the leadership now. And this is where I think applies to a lot of the things we have been saying this evening. Each member is a contributor to the success or the failure of what we are talking about. If I don't want to like the one who is coming in, if I don't want to be more open to and more accepting of the youth, then we will have a challenge. And the Last Day Church is a church that has no generational gap. The message is going to change the older ones to love the young ones and the young ones to love the old ones. I rest my case there. Give somebody else the opportunity to say something.
Say that you had a program with Dr. Josiah and music, and I think that he made some significant points in relation to some of the assumptions that we operate by. You know, we operate on assumptions that, you know, the tradition is better than the contemporary and things like that. You know, we have to give everybody a space, create a space, and as spiritual leaders, we have to model, you know, the diversities that we face, and recognize that everybody, once it is to glorify God, once it is to exalt Christ, then we must create that opportunity for diversity and realize that there is beauty in that diversity.
I believe
there's truth. There's truth, and there is spirit. Truth is the basis, and spirit is the manner. And along the whole pathway, there are going to be some things that masquerade as spirit, and there are going to be some things that masquerade as truth. We have to find a way that our members get the picture of what is truth. What is truth in relation to a piece of music, you know, and what is not truth in relation to a piece of music. Because that too is part of what they're talking about in terms of the excitement. What is truth and what is not? What is spirit and what is not? And give all of our people, young and old, the picture of what church is, what it's supposed to be, what would it look like. And yes, there will be those who will cry when they remember what the former foundation looked like. And there are those who will rejoice when they see the present foundation. And it is those who saw the present foundation that happen to have Christ enter their church. I declare that somewhere, if we could keep this church together, knowing that God still is in charge of this church, we'll be in a very good place. This is the church that Jesus is going to come for. With these young people, with these challenges, with these situations that we are facing, this is my Father's church.
You know, gentlemen, I have to say thank you very much for sharing. Our time has expired. I will seek to bring us back sometime else. There are some significant issues. I saw somewhere in the chat Somebody was asking about the whole matter of hairstyles. Should we baptize Rastafarians with their locks versus not doing it, etc. So there's a whole lot to talk about. And Dr. Tobias, you mentioned some of the past programs that we've had on Let's Talk. Also have, they're all there on YouTube. You can go and search SLC Adventist Let's Talk and go back and replay some of these things. In the meantime, I would like to let all of our viewers know that today's program will be available in just a short while for people to review if they so desire. In addition to that, so in a few moments, we will have that up. But in the meantime, I would like to let you know that next week we have another very interesting discussion on Let's Talk. Next week, we're going to be discussing medical marijuana. Where does the church stand? And, what's the right and wrong about it? Next week, medical marijuana. And as I said, the week after that, we begin a two-part series with some of the directors from the Biblical Research Institute. We're going to be talking about the King James Version only, Bible versions. This whole discussion on which is the right version. And after that, the charge of Catholic influences in the church and the fanatical ideologies that some are posing. We have some very interesting things lined up.
Yes.
The time is 3 p.m. We are grateful again, gentlemen, for your presence. We're going to give you half a second. No, I shouldn't give you any time because you're preachers, so you may take all the time. But if you can prove me wrong in 10 seconds each, just say your final words.
Well, I hope the members will have benefited from this, and may God bless them.
Amen. Pastor Moses.
I think there's relevance in the community of faith, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have the truth that is always relevant, and we just need to rise to the occasion to meet the needs of our generation.
Thank you, Pastor Moses. Then Pastor Mapp, and I'll leave the president of the union to say the last word.
I would suggest follow the injunctions found in Philippians 4, verse 8, in terms of relevance, and it should put you in the right place.
Pastor Mapp.
And if we do unto others as we'll have them do unto us, we'll find a very relevant church.
Dr. Tobias.
The relevance has to be related to Jesus Christ. Somehow he was able to always have it right. So let's keep looking to the Master and follow the pattern he has left us.
Amen. Thank you so much, and may God bless you. We will be back here next week again. As I said, medical marijuana, a very interesting discussion, 3 p.m. God bless you.
God bless you.
God bless you.